The morning I found the boathouse empty, I was still holding my coffee. I remember that, because when I pushed the door open and saw the lift, my hand started shaking hard enough that the coffee went over the rim and burned my knuckles, and I didn't feel it until later. The cradle was bare. 25 years that boat had rested in the same spot, and now there was nothing but a puddle of fresh bilgewater on the concrete and a clean rectangle where the dust hadn't had time to settle back down. You could see the exact shape of where she'd been, like a body outlined on a floor. 41 years of marriage taught me exactly one thing about betrayal. It never knocks. It just walks in wearing a family member's face. My name is Charles Greenberg. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent nearly every one of those years on the water. First as a kid too broke to own a boat, later as the man behind Greenberg Boat Works. It started with one rented slip at the Traverse City Marina, a folding card table, and a coffee can full of brass screws. 4 decades later, it's 4 full-service marinas along Grand Traverse Bay and a shop that still builds wooden runabouts by hand for people who understand that some things shouldn't be made of fiberglass. But none of that is why I'm telling you this story. My wife Eleanor died 9 months before that morning. A brain aneurysm, no warning, no symptoms, no mercy. She was laughing at the television on a Saturday night. By Sunday, before the coffee finished brewing, I was kneeling on our kitchen floor saying her name to a woman who was already gone. I didn't know it then, but that Sunday was only the first time my world got pulled out from under me. It would not be the last. What Eleanor left behind, the one thing I could still put my hands on, sat in the boathouse behind our home on Old Mission Peninsula. A 1958 Chris Craft Capri. Mahogany hull, chrome trim, the kind of boat nobody builds anymore because nobody has the patience for it. She'd bought it as a wreck at an estate auction 25 years ago. $400. Everyone thought she was crazy, including me. Then she spent a quarter of a century proving us all wrong. She tracked down original hardware from a salvage yard in Wisconsin. She hand-planed replacement ribs from white oak she seasoned herself. She stripped 7 layers of ruined varnish with a heat gun, a scraper, and vocabulary I swear I never taught her. She named the boat the Grace. Nobody else on the peninsula bothered with the name. They just called it Eleanor's boat, because there was never a question whose it was. After she passed, I went out to that boathouse most mornings before the shop opened. I'd sit in the Grace with my coffee and breathe in varnish and cedar and something underneath it that I swear was still her. It was the only place on earth where the missing didn't cut quite so deep. Until that Monday, until the empty cradle and the burned knuckles and the puddle on the floor. My first thought was theft. My second thought, once the panic cleared enough for logic to crawl back in, was that theft made no sense. The door had been locked, I just unlocked it myself. No broken glass, no pried hinges, nothing else in the boathouse touched. Then there was the camera. Eleanor had insisted we install it after a break-in 2 doors down. I pulled up the footage on my phone right there in the doorway, and my stomach went cold before my brain caught up with why. Empty dock at 3 in the morning. Empty dock at 4, and then, at 11 minutes past 4, a gap. Dead screen. Somebody had cut the feed at the junction box. Not smashed it, not ripped wires in a hurry. Cut it, clean, which meant somebody knew exactly where that box was mounted, behind the paddleboard rack where you'd never find it unless you'd been told. I stood there doing a kind of math I never thought I'd have to do. 3 keys to that boathouse existed in the entire world. 3 people knew the camera code. 1 was mine, hanging on my belt. 1 belonged to Frank Delgado, our caretaker of 20 years, currently somewhere in the Upper Peninsula with a fishing rod and a phone he keeps switched off on principle. And the 3rd key belonged to my son. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself a lot of things that morning that turned out to be wrong. Before I let myself dial anybody, I walked the property. 40 years of running a business teaches you to look before you talk, and some stubborn part of me needed to see the evidence with my own eyes before I heard it from somebody's mouth. I found it at the private ramp on the north side of the lot. 2 long, fresh tire tracks pressed into the gravel, wide set, heavy, a tandem axle trailer, loaded going out. There were boot prints along the edge where somebody had guided a hull down the rollers in the dark, and a smear of marine grease on the winch post that hadn't been there Friday. Whoever did this hadn't broken in. They'd let themselves in. They'd backed a trailer down a ramp they knew by heart, in the dark, without hitting a single piling. They'd winched a 3,000-pound boat out of her cradle quietly enough that the neighbor's dogs never made a sound. That's not a thief, that's family. Tyler owned a trailer exactly like that. Used it every summer for his own runabout. He'd been backing down that ramp since he was 16 years old. My hands were shaking hard enough that it took 2 tries to unlock my phone. He picked up on the 4th ring, and before he said a word I heard the giveaway behind him, flat echoing announcements. Rolling luggage, the shuffle of 100 strangers. He wasn't anywhere near Traverse City. Hey, Dad, little busy right now. Where are you, Tyler? Cherry Capital Airport. We board in 20. Megan and I are finally doing that Europe trip we've been talking about. Where is your mother's boat? There was a pause, and I want you to understand something about that pause, because it's the detail I still can't get past. It wasn't a guilty pause. It was an annoyed one. The pause of a man interrupted about something small. Okay, don't freak out. Where is it? I sold it. Higgins took it off my hands yesterday. Fair price. Everybody's happy. The words hit me like a dock piling coming down. I had to put my free hand flat on the workbench just to stay upright. You sold your mother's boat. Dad, Mom's been gone almost a year. It was sitting in a shed collecting dust and eating insurance money. It's not doing anybody any good rotting in a boathouse. That boat was 25 years of her life, Tyler. It wasn't yours to sell. Technically, it's going to be mine eventually anyway. I'm the only kid you've got. I just moved the timeline up a little. A boarding chime rang out behind him, and he raised his voice over it, casual as a man ordering coffee. Look, Megan's been in a rough place since the funeral. She needs this. First class, the whole thing. You always say family comes first. I'm just doing what you do. I almost laughed, and there was nothing funny in it. Megan hadn't shed a single tear at Eleanor's funeral. She'd spent the reception complaining that the caterer's chicken was dry. Get over it, Dad. It's a boat. We'll talk when we land. And the line went dead. I stood in that boathouse with the phone still against my ear, listening to nothing. And somewhere under the hurt, something colder and clearer started working, because when you've run a company for 40 years, you learn to smell a story that doesn't add up before you can even say why. So I did the math. A first-class trip to Europe for 2, even if Megan booked every suite in sight, tops out around $35. Maybe $40,000. I knew exactly what the grace was worth, because Eleanor and I had her appraised for the insurance rider 3 years back. A fully restored, numbers matching 1958 Chris Craft Capri doesn't sell for $40,000. She sells for closer to $300. To the right collector, more. Tyler was arrogant. He could be careless with people's feelings in ways that still surprised me at 39. But he was not stupid, and he had never once in his life walked away from $250,000 sitting on a table. Which meant the trip wasn't the reason. The trip was the cover story. I was still standing in that boathouse working the math when my phone rang again. Unknown number. Charlevoix area code. Mr. Greenberg? Walter Higgins, over at Higgins Classic Boat Brokerage. His voice had an edge to it I didn't like. I bought a boat off your son yesterday. The Capri. I know. He told me, sir, you need to come down here today if you can. There's something your wife left inside that boat, and I think you need to see it before I do anything else with this thing. Something my wife left. Eleanor had been gone 9 months, and here was a stranger on the phone talking about her like she'd stepped out of the room an hour ago. I made myself slow down and ask the businessman's question instead of the widower's. How did you get my number, Mr. Higgins? And how does a broker hand over that kind of money without confirming who he's handing it to? He didn't get all of it. Not even close. And he isn't going to. There was paper shuffling on his end. Standard practice on anything over $50,000 where a power of attorney's involved. I write a deposit, hold the balance in escrow, and I don't release a dime until the title clears the state and I've sat on it for 30 days. I didn't say anything. He kept going, and every sentence dropped another piece on the table. That Capri is still registered to you and a Mrs. Eleanor Greenberg. It never got retitled to your son. He showed up with a letter, supposedly notarized, supposedly signed by you, and a license that matched the family name. Looked clean enough for a deposit check. It was not clean enough for me to wire out $260,000, POA or no POA. That's not caution, sir. That's just how the paperwork works on a boat like this. Supposedly signed by you. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been asked to sign anything. I stood there while the pieces clicked together in the cold morning air, a letter with my name on it, a notary stamp I'd never sat in front of, my son sliding it across a broker's desk with a straight face. Walter Higgins had just described a forgery to me, politely, without either of us saying the word out loud. Your name was right there on the registration, he went on, and everybody on this bay knows who Charles Greenberg is. Took me 2 minutes to find your office number. I was going to call you either way before I released another cent. And then this morning I found what your wife hid behind that dash, and today stopped being about the paperwork. So there it was. Whatever Tyler walked away with at that airport gate wasn't the boat's worth. It was a deposit, ticket money. The rest of it froze solid in an escrow account the moment this man picked up the phone. What did she leave, Mr. Higgins? I'd rather show you than say it over the phone. But Mr. Greenberg, whatever your son told you about why he sold this boat, I don't think that's the real reason. I found a metal box zip tied up under the dash, behind the gauge cluster. Somebody hid it well. It wasn't meant to be found by anybody but your wife. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember most of the 40-minute drive up the shoreline to Charlevoix. What I remember is standing in Walter Higgins's shop under a single work light, looking down at a small fireproof lockbox sitting open on his bench. Inside it, a flash drive, a stack of folded papers bound with a rubber band gone brittle with age, and a spiral notebook, filled with handwriting I would have known anywhere on this earth. Eleanor's handwriting. I almost didn't call you. Walter rubbed the back of his neck. Figured it was old paperwork. Then I opened the notebook. I picked it up with hands that weren't entirely steady. The first page was dated a little over 2 years back, months before Eleanor died. And the first line, in her neat blue ink, read, "If anyone but me ever finds this, something has already gone wrong, and Charles needs to know everything." I looked up. Walter was watching me with the careful, sorry expression of a man who suspected he'd just handed a widower a live grenade. "Mr. Higgins," I kept my voice as level as I could manage, "I need you to hold this boat. Don't sell it, don't move it, don't touch it. I'll pay whatever it costs to keep her right here." "Sir, I'd already figured that much." He nodded at the notebook in my hands. "Whatever's in there, I hope it's not as bad as it looks." It was worse. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks and get comfortable, because the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, you're going to love it here. I didn't drive home. I couldn't. I sat in the cab of my truck in Walter Higgins's gravel lot as the sun went down over the water, reading my dead wife's handwriting by the dashboard light, one page at a time, like a man taking slow sips of something he knows is going to burn. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Dates, dollar figures, columns ruled out by hand with the same patience she'd used to strip 7 layers of varnish off a dead boat. And in a few places, initials where names should have been, like she hadn't decided yet who in our lives could still be trusted with a full name in ink. The first entry that stopped my breathing was dated almost 2 years back. Blue ink, margin note, her small tight cursive, invoices from Charlevoix and Elk Rapids spike every quarter, then quietly correct before the annual audit. Vendor doesn't match any vendor I can find. Doesn't add up. The second one came 4 months later. Asked SR about the discrepancy on the Pulaski account. Got a story about a software glitch. Not buying it. Going to pull the last 3 years of statements myself. Senior. My VP of operations for the last 12 years was a man named Scott Ramsey. I hired him myself. I stood up at his wedding. I handed him the keys to 4 marinas and every dollar that moved through them, and I slept fine doing it. And my wife, my quiet wife, who everybody assumed spent her spare time sanding mahogany and nothing else, had been sitting at that workbench pulling 3 years of bank statements on her own. Telling no one, checking the math on my empire while I wasn't looking. I turned pages, months of them, numbers tightening, question marks disappearing, her notes getting shorter and surer the closer she got. Then I reached the last entry, and the truck went very quiet around me. It was dated 11 days before she died. Found the wire transfers, came in accounts. This isn't Scott acting alone. There's a second signature on the authorizations and it isn't his. Talked to Charles Sunday. Everything's on the flash drive. Don't let this die with me. Talked to Charles Sunday. I read that line 4 times before I could make myself believe it said what it said. She found it, all of it, days before her heart of a brain gave out on our kitchen floor, on a Sunday morning. She'd been carrying this to me. She never got the chance to open her mouth. And for 9 months, whoever owned that second signature had been walking around free, acting like the money and the silence were both theirs to keep. My phone had 1 bar of battery left when I called Cynthia Blackburn, my attorney for 30 years, and Eleanor's closest friend outside the family. It was nearly 9 at night. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always has for me, and I gave her all of it. The empty boathouse, the airport call, the forged letter, the lockbox, the initials senior, the second signature Eleanor never got to name. The silence on her end went on long enough that I checked the phone was still connected. When Cynthia finally spoke, her voice had gone flat and careful, the tone she saves for the moments she's genuinely scared. Charles, listen to me very carefully. Don't call Scott, don't call Tyler back, don't breathe a word to anyone at the company. I want that flash drive in front of a forensic accountant I trust before the sun comes up, and I want to know exactly how deep this goes before anybody gets a chance to shred a single sheet of paper. Cynthia, if Eleanor found this 11 days before she died, I know what you're thinking. Don't go there, not yet. Right now we have proof of exactly one thing, that your wife suspected fraud. So we get proof before we get angry. Angry gets you sued, Charles. Proof gets you justice. I sat in that dark cab a long time after we hung up, the notebook resting on the passenger seat where Eleanor used to sit, like it might say one more thing if I waited long enough. Out across the black water, the lights of Charlevoix came on one by one. And somewhere over the Atlantic, 35,000 feet up, my son and his wife were drinking champagne on a stolen boat's deposit money, with no idea the ground back home had just opened up underneath all of us. I still didn't have a name for that second signature, only a gut feeling I would have given anything not to have. By 7 the next morning, I was sitting in Cynthia's office watching a stranger plug my wife's flash drive into a laptop, and some part of me already knew that whatever came up on that screen was going to redraw the map of my whole family. The stranger's name was Rebecca Chen, forensic accountant, Cynthia's first call, and after watching her work for one day, I understood why. She was sharp, quiet, and completely allergic to guessing. She'd loaded Eleanor's files before I finished my first cup of coffee, and the laptop never left her sight, not once, not even to refill her own. It took her less than 3 hours to lay out, in cold and patient numbers, exactly what my wife had stumbled onto. For a little over 3 years, money had been bleeding out of the Charlevoix and Elk Rapids accounts through a vendor called North Shore Marine Supply. It looked legitimate on an invoice, letterhead, purchase orders, part numbers, but Rebecca couldn't find a warehouse, an employee, a phone line, or a single physical trace of the company anywhere on Earth. North Shore Marine Supply existed in exactly 2 places, on paper, and in a bank account in the Cayman Islands. These invoices needed an operations sign-off, Rebecca said, scrolling. Scott Ramsey's authorization is on nearly all of them. Scott, Sr., just like Eleanor's blue ink had warned. 12 years I'd trusted that man. I'd stood up at his wedding. It hurt, but it didn't surprise me anymore. The notebook had already spent that shock. What the notebook hadn't spent was the second name. The wire transfers are a different story, Rebecca went on. Anything over a certain dollar amount requires a second executive signature. Company policy, your policy. I believe. She turned the laptop toward me. There were 11 of those transfers. She enlarged the signature line. Tyler Greenberg, 11 times, not once, not buried in a stack on a busy afternoon. 11 separate authorizations, spread across 3 years, wiring company money to an island bank account, each one signed in my son's handwriting. The same handwriting I'd watched develop from crayon on our kitchen wall to a signature he practiced in high school because he said a businessman needed a good one. Rebecca watched my face the way you watch a man standing too close to an edge. Not unkindly, Mr. Greenberg, before you go anywhere with this, a signature doesn't automatically mean knowledge. Plenty of executives sign whatever's put in front of them. If Scott Ramsey controlled the paperwork flow, a defense attorney would argue Tyler never read a line of it. My son reads everything. My own voice sounded far away. He negotiated his own trust fund distribution schedule when he was 26. He redlined it. He does not sign things he hasn't read. Nobody in the room argued with me. That was somehow worse. Cynthia put a hand on my arm. Then we confirm it before we say one word to him. If he's in it, we handle it right. If he's not, we protect him. Some small stubborn part of me spent the rest of that day hoping Rebecca would find the thing that cleared him. An email showing Scott had deceived him. A pattern proving the signatures were rubber stamped. Anything. That part of me got smaller every hour. Because the deeper Rebecca dug, the worse the shape of it got. This wasn't smash and grab greed. This was patience. Small amounts in year 1, rounding error money, vendor overcharge money. The kind of leakage every marine business writes off without blinking. Then bigger, once it was clear nobody was looking. Whoever built this understood exactly how our accounting worked, where the audit looked and where it didn't, because I had trained him myself. By the second evening, Rebecca had the total. Just over $2.1 million across 3 years, all of it funneled through North Shore. But the money hadn't stayed in one place. It split, Part of it flowed to an account tied to Scott. The largest transfers, the serious money, moved through a second entity entirely. A holding company Rebecca was still unwinding, registered through an agent at an address in Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids, 200 miles from any of our operations. Nothing of ours down there. I remember frowning at that line on her screen for a second. Filing it under strange, and moving on. I shouldn't have moved on. How long until you know who's behind the holding company? Cynthia asked. A day, maybe two. Whoever set it up used a registered agent to stay off the paperwork, but nobody stays off all the paperwork. That night I sat in Eleanor's chair by the window and did the thing Cynthia had told me not to do. Got angry ahead of the proof. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that sits in your chest and reorganizes the furniture in there. 11 signatures, 3 years, and a boy I taught to read a balance sheet at 14, telling me over an airport intercom that it was just a boat. Tyler and Megan's return flight landed in 4 days. When I told Cynthia I wanted to look my son in the eye and ask him directly, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said the coldest, smartest sentence anyone said to me through this entire ordeal. Say nothing, set the table, let them walk into it. Tyler and Megan landed back in Michigan on the 5th day. Jet-lagged and tan, dragging a suitcase full of duty-free through an airport they had no idea was the last normal place they'd walked through for a long time. The night before, Rebecca had finished unwinding the holding company. When she slid that final printout across Cynthia's desk and I read the name behind the Grand Rapids address, I didn't say anything for a full minute. I just sat there recalculating 2 years of family dinners in my head. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At that point, only 3 people alive knew what was on that page, and 2 of us were determined to keep it that way until the table was set. I called Tyler and asked him to come by the house that evening. Told him I wanted to talk about the boat. Nothing more, kept my voice level, kept the wound out of it. He actually sounded relieved. Like he figured the old man had cooled off and wanted to smooth things over before Sunday dinners got awkward. Cynthia arrived an hour early. She sat in the study with the door cracked 2 inches. A recorder running on her explicit legal instructions. Rebecca's full report sat on the kitchen table in a plain manila folder. I set it down the way you set down a loaded gun, carefully, and knowing exactly what it was. Tyler walked in first, sunburned and loose, talking before he'd cleared the doorway. Dad, before you start, I know the boat thing was harsh timing-wise, but I already told you why, and I'm not going to apologize for taking care of my wife. Sit down, Tyler. Something in my voice stopped him mid-stride. Megan drifted in behind him, scrolling her phone, barely bothering to glance up. She'd gotten some sun in Europe. It looked good on her. Most things did. That was always the thing about Megan. The surface never had a scratch on it. I waited until they were both seated. Then I said 5 words. North Shore Marine Supply. Ring a bell? The room went very still. And here's the detail I will carry to my grave. Tyler's face didn't move at first. But Megan's thumb, the one that had been scrolling since she walked through my door, stopped dead on the screen. Frozen. Mid-swipe. Never heard of it, Tyler said. Too fast. 20 years of sitting across negotiating tables from men trying to sell me things teaches you what too fast sounds like. That's interesting, because your signature is on 11 wire transfer authorizations moving company money to a North Shore account in the Cayman Islands. Over 3 years, $2.1 million, give or take. Dad, he laughed. Actually laughed, one short nervous bark of it. I sign 100 things a week. If Scott put paperwork in front of me. Don't. It came out harder than I intended. Don't hide behind Scott's paperwork. Your mother found this, Tyler. Before she died, she wrote it all down, dates, amounts, your initials sitting right next to his. She was planning to bring it to me on a Sunday morning. The same Sunday morning I found her on this kitchen floor, 10 feet from where you're sitting. The aneurysm beat her to it. That's the only reason you've had 9 quiet months. Tyler opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in his adult life, my son had no angle ready. But I wasn't finished. I turned my head, slow and level, to my daughter-in-law. And the second account, Megan. The one that received the largest transfers. The one that moved the real money offshore. I slid the folder 2 inches toward her. That one isn't registered to Scott. It isn't registered to Tyler. It's registered to a holding company filed in Grand Rapids, 18 months ago. Filed by you. I want you to understand something about that moment. I have negotiated manufacturing contracts worth more than my son's entire net worth without my pulse moving a beat. But standing in my own kitchen, watching Megan's face go the color of old paper, watching the surface finally crack. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press them flat against the table to keep them still. She didn't deny it. That's the part people never believe when I tell this story. She just set her phone down. Very gently, screen side down, like she was putting something to sleep. "Dad, listen," Tyler started. "I don't want to hear another lie in this house." I stood, both palms flat on that table. "Not one more. Your mother spent 25 years restoring a boat with her bare hands, and you forged my name to sell it in an afternoon. For pocket money. On top of the fortune you'd already been bleeding out of this family for 3 years. Get out of my house. Both of you. My attorney will be in touch. You can't just. I built this company from a card table and a coffee can, Tyler. I can absolutely just." They left. No slammed door, no shouting on the lawn. Just the click of the latch and then a silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator hum. I sat alone in that kitchen for a long time afterward, listening to the quiet the way you listen to a wound, trying to gauge how bad it really was. I thought that confrontation was the hardest part of this whole story. I was wrong about that, too. The hardest part was still 3 weeks away, and it came out of Scott Ramsey's mouth. The next morning, I walked into Scott Ramsey's office with Cynthia at my side and Rebecca's full financial trail printed out in a folder that hit his desk like a dropped anchor. 12 years, that man had run operations for me. I hired him myself. I stood up at his wedding. And as I watched him look down at that folder, at the North Shore invoices, the wire authorizations, the whole patient architecture of it, I braced myself for denial. For anger. For a lawyer's name thrown across the desk. What I got instead was worse, in its own way. Relief. The look of a man setting down a weight he'd carried so long his shoulders had forgotten how to sit level. He didn't even open the folder. He already knew what was in it. "Your son came to me 4 years ago," Scott said, eyes fixed on the desk. "Right after his regional manager promotion. Complaining about his salary, about what he figured he deserved as your only kid. Megan had expensive taste, and Tyler had a chip on his shoulder about being handed a title without the money he thought should come with it. I told him it wasn't my problem." He rubbed his face with both hands. He came back a month later with the shell vendor already worked out. "North Shore. Said it'd be small, quiet, nobody would ever look. I should have walked into your office that same day, Charles. God knows I should have. Instead I let him talk me into a cut. And once you're in something like that, you're in. There's no clean way back out." I let the silence sit a moment. Then I said the thing I'd driven there to say. "My wife found it, 11 days before she died. She was going to bring it to me on a Sunday. She never got the chance." Scott's face went white, genuinely, instantly white, the way a face only goes when it's hearing something for the first time. "I didn't know that, I swear to you, Charles. I did not know Eleanor had found anything. Did Tyler?" The silence that followed that question is the longest silence of my life. Scott stared at the desk for a while. When he finally answered, his voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I don't know, but I'll tell you what I do know. About 3 weeks before she passed, he started moving faster. Bigger transfers, closer together. I figured it was just greed picking up speed. Now, he finally looked up at me. Now I'm wondering if he knew she was getting close. I want to tell you that sentence didn't do anything to me. That would be a lie. I drove home that evening and I didn't turn on a single light in the house. I sat in Eleanor's chair by the window and I ran the timeline over and over like a man sanding the same board long after it's smooth. 11 days, 3 weeks, her pulling statements at the workbench while her own son, maybe, watched her circle closer and decided not to stop, but to hurry. The doctors said the aneurysm had no cause anyone could point to. No warning, no fault. I believe them, I do. But there is a version of that last month of her life where she carried the weight of what she'd found completely alone. Saying nothing, protecting everyone, while the person she was protecting sped up the theft behind her back. And I will never know whether my son understood what his mother was carrying, or whether he simply got lucky when her heart's clock ran out before her courage did. I spent every hour of that night turning it over. I have never landed on an answer I can live with. Rebecca's full report went to the U.S. Attorney's Office on the 9th day. Cayman wire transfers don't stay a local matter for long. Cynthia froze every account Tyler and Megan could touch, cut them from the corporate insurance, and started the paperwork to remove my son from the family trust. Scott resigned before I could fire him and cooperated from the moment the subpoenas landed, which, Cynthia told me flatly, was the only thing standing between him and a sentence twice as long. He got 3 years, and on his way out of that hearing he looked at me exactly once and mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." I believed him. It didn't change anything. Tyler and Megan took it all the way to a jury trial. 6 months after that Monday morning, I sat in a federal courtroom gallery, and I'll spare you the procedure, because only 3 moments from those 6 days actually matter. The first was Eleanor's notebook, entered into evidence as Exhibit A. Her handwriting projected 10 feet tall on a courtroom screen she never lived to see. 12 strangers reading her blue ink. Don't let this die with me. It didn't, sweetheart, it didn't. The second was my son's back. 6 days of testimony, and Tyler never once turned around to look at me. Not once. I still don't know if that was shame or strategy, and I've stopped expecting to find out. The third was Megan, on the final day, turning and finding my eyes for exactly 1 second, with an expression I still can't name. Not remorse, not anger, something closer to disbelief that any of this was actually happening to her. The jury took 4 hours. Guilty on all of it: wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, forgery. Tyler got 7 years, Megan got 9, the judge citing the offshore holding company she'd personally built as the work of a calculated hand, not a supporting one. Watching my son stand for sentencing in a suit I bought him for his college graduation, hearing a stranger in a black robe count out the years of his life. I can't describe that to you the way I've described everything else. Some silences don't have a description. That one sat in my chest for a long time and refused to leave. The restitution clawed back just over 1.9 of the 2.1 million, most of it out of the frozen offshore accounts before Megan's lawyers finished arguing jurisdiction. I refused to fold that money quietly back into the company like nothing had happened. Instead, it became the Eleanor Greenberg Foundation for Aneurysm Research and Awareness, early detection screening at 3 regional hospitals, research grants aimed at catching exactly the kind of silent, symptomless thing that took her on an ordinary Saturday night. Her name is on hospital equipment now instead of a shell company's filing paperwork. That felt like the only correct use for it. The company got rebuilt too, outside audit, half the senior managers replaced, and this time I promoted from the docks. Mechanics, dock hands, people with 20 years of calluses instead of fancy letterhead. The business runs leaner now. Honestly, it runs better. I'd like to tell you the story ties off clean. It doesn't. Tyler writes to me from the facility. I've read every letter. I haven't answered one. I don't know if I ever will, and I've made an uneasy peace with not knowing. Grief and betrayal don't run on the same schedule, and I won't force either one just to give anybody, including myself, a tidier ending. But here's what I did do. One clear evening about a month after the trial, I drove up to Charlevoix and bought back the Grace. Walter Higgins had held her the whole time, turned down 3 collectors flat, because in his words, some boats aren't really for sale no matter what the paperwork says. I paid him fairly and towed her home myself, down the peninsula at dusk, and winched her back into the cradle where she belonged. I go out there most evenings now. I sit in her with my coffee, run my hand along mahogany that Eleanor sanded smooth with her own 2 hands, and I remember my wife the way she deserves. Not as a footnote in a fraud case, but as the quiet one at the workbench who never stopped paying attention. She found the truth before any of us. I just finished the sentence she never got to say. So let me ask you, have you ever discovered a betrayal hiding inside what looked like an ordinary family disagreement? How did you find out, and what did you do once you knew? Tell me your story in the comments. And if this one held you to the end, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell, because the next story is already waiting.